every so often something comes across our way that we're just at the right time and place to be receptive to it. And Eric was that for us. I'd seen the beautiful artwork with the very where the wild things are kind of looking character. As I learned looking at synopsis, nothing like where the wild things are, but I was intrigued. Because this is a show that stands on two core pillars, and one is a bit more important than the other, and I will talk about that one first. Because that's the disappearance of Edgar. It's a bit heavy-handed, but in the first few episodes we're led to believe that maybe his father Vincent was part of it. And this is a problem, I think, in a lot of modern media. Because they know that people are dual screening, you're probably on your phone or a tablet or something like that at the same time, they want to hammer a point home in case you missed it the last time it was in a scene. What that meant is, I didn't believe that Vincent had done anything by probably the second episode, because it was so overt. It would be a disservice for that to have been the fact. Keeping it hidden would have been a much better thing if it was the case. So I immediately was like, no, it's not at all. This isn't right. But that disappearance is spurred by a terrible family dynamic when we learn that Vincent didn't directly do anything, shall we say, to cause it. Edgar ran off because the household was not good for him. His dad asked him for ideas about new creatures for, his puppet show, his sort of Sesame Street analogue, if you will, and didn't really listen. It was the idea of, hey, I'm going to ask my child a question because that's supposedly a good thing, but I don't need to listen to the answer, do I? And remember, this is set in the 80s. We were still very much in that nuclear family model. You have a dad who goes out and earns the money, that's how they keep a child alive, and then you have a mother who stays at home and does everything else to keep the child alive. Thankfully, over the years, for the most part, we have gotten better. We understand that those are not tried and true, absolute gender roles, and we accept more fluidity in gender identity. So a typical household now does not follow that model. And again, I would say by and large, it's healthier. When we accept that every part of a family contributes in their own way, that works really well. And that's one of the issues in this household. I'm one of those people who, if you came to me and said, I hate my spouse and we're only staying together for the kids, my first question would be, do you argue? If their answer is anything other than no, I would advise, obviously I'm not going to tell anyone, but I'd advise that maybe at least a separation to trial might be a good move. Because if they say no, not in front of the kids anyway, trust me, kids pick up on this stuff. To have a healthier childhood, it might be better to have two separate, healthier places for the child to inhabit than one less healthy. Because this is an interesting psychosocial aspect of the show. It is that whole idea of generational trauma, Vincent's own issues with his own father being passed on to his own son. Plus, like I say, the social pressures, things like that, of having to perform. And the fact that because of coming from privilege, but not wanting to lean on it, Vincent is almost hampering himself. So when things are difficult and he's struggling, he's immediately already on the back foot because he's cut off one avenue of support. This is a man who is in crisis, absolutely. The reason he's drinking so heavily, arguing with his wife, all of this stuff, is because he's at breaking point. The fact that the disappearance causes this sort of psychotic break in him where he's seeing the character his child designed walking around mocking him. And it's so well performed by Benedict Cumberbatch. In series, I don't tend to name performers because there's a lot of performers generally in a series and it's quite unwieldy to name like 10 people because they're all as valid and important as each other. But in this, I do think Benedict Cumberbatch does really well. Everyone does. But he really stands out because sometimes he's playing against nothing. There was a wonderful, I don't know if it's the last episode or the penultimate episode, where he has a Tyler Durden moment, and he does it well. I don't think it's as good as Edward Norton, I'll admit that, but still, he does it well here. But the other pillar is the corruption and institutionalized racism and homophobia of the police side of things. There's so much there that I could literally do a video. I could have spread this out as a series on each of the parts. It's that much. But the whole idea that LeDroit is... I say it that way because it's French. LeDroit, I think they call him. I don't like that. But it's like LaCroix. Fine, whatever. But anyway, Mike. He is a black gay man. I almost see this as like what Raymond Holt would have dealt with if you're familiar with Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I would hope you are. It's a good show. Go and watch it if you haven't. But that's very much it. He's a black gay man in the police in the 80s. One of those things on their own, like black or gay, would have been bad enough. But coupling it, plus having a partner who is on his way out, because it's the 80s and gay men are dying left, right and centre. But no one is there to support him, because it's very much the boys' club. The fact that his superior keeps trying to set him up on a date with a colleague is awful, because you're seeing him having to deny himself. But he is a good detective. He's a dog with a bone, and he's not letting it go, because he clashes with a lot of his fellow detectives in other departments. And it's causing problems for him at work. There's very much a parallel between Vincent and Mike. They are both having problems at work that are sort of self-inflicted. I say sort of, being generous to the two characters. They're not willfully and actively going, I'm going to screw myself over and make my life harder. It's just the kind of people they are. But they are having this difficulty, both of them, and they could do things to make their life easy, but they don't want to. They want to push themselves. But Mike's side is very upsetting. And the fact that this whole drive to clean up the town by just booting out the homeless but not giving them anywhere to live, as well as, like I say, the corruption that he finds with people, covering up murders and all this kind of stuff. And that ties in to Vincent's story and to Edgar's story, because the eviction of the homeless people makes it a little harder for a second to find Edgar. He had to flee. Otherwise, he'd have been there. And it would have wrapped up nice and neat. We don't want that. I mean, it does wrap up nice and neat by the end. It is a very saccharine, sweet kind of ending. There is a relationship being restored between father and son at the end. And I'm fine with that. I accept that, because it goes to some very hard, some very difficult, some very dark places. Because that's how things were, and in some places the world still are, sadly. But this is one of those shows that I was definitely in the right place and the right time for it. My understanding of family dynamics through personal and educational, if you will, experience, my vague memories of the 80s, but also my reading of the history that I kind of lived through, but I was too young. It's a good show, if that hasn't come through. It's something that I want more of. Again, if we can have a little less of the, oh, look, he might have killed his son, that would be nice. But overall, I cannot recommend this strongly enough. And I don't normally recommend dark things, but that's how much I enjoyed this. Go on the journey. I know I've ruined it. If I always put a spoiler warning at the start. It's on you if you've watched and you've not seen it yet. But seriously, it's well worth a watch. It's well done all round. But that's all I'm going to say on Eric. I mean, like I say, I could have done a whole series on every single element of the story, but I want to keep this under 10 minutes. So thank you very much for letting me talk about this, as always. And until next time, take care.